Hello and welcome to Give Toke, the show that elevates the conversation about cannabis to a higher level. I'm your host, Paul O'Donoghue, and today we welcome someone who truly needs no introduction to this audience. Rachel Payne is joining us for her third appearance on the podcast, which says a lot in itself. Rachel is a Member of Parliament in Victoria and is one of the most consistent, informed and principled voices in Parliament when it comes to cannabis reform, harm reduction and evidence-based drug policy more broadly. If you've heard Rachel on the show before, you already know the depth and clarity she brings to these conversations. And if this is your first time tuning in, you'll quickly understand why we keep having her back. As usual, you can get in touch with me on Instagram at Give Toke, along with visiting givetoke.com.au. Rachel, welcome back.
Oh my gosh, Paul, has it been, is this our third opportunity to get together? That's amazing.
This is our third time. You're the only guest that I've let come back 3 times as well.
Well, I'm completely and utterly honoured. Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
It's so nice to have you back. You know, we've made no secret through this connection. We've actually become, genuine friends. So even though we're podcasting, it's always nice to catch up, always nice to see you and hear how things are going.
And I like the idea of an annual review. I mean, so much happens in a 12-month period that it's not until you sit down and reflect on that do you think, wow, we are actually getting somewhere, even if it is baby steps.
No, I thought you politicians do nothing. You just sit up there in your ivory tower. There's nothing for us to talk about today.
Look, I won't comment on my colleagues.
Well, on that note, if you had to describe the last year in one word or one nutshell statement, what would it be?
Oh, wow. Ricochet. Definitely moments where you think you're sort of stepping forward and making progress, and then it's sort of like a rubber band. It starts to ricochet back at you. And I think that that's not just been the experience of me in Parliament, but people in the world more broadly.
Yeah, I'll kind of speak from like an industry perspective, and I'd say had a very optimistic first half of 2025 and then a very pessimistic second half. Like I felt like, just kind of pushing shit uphill and, things weren't quite getting to the places they wanted to. So that might be a theme of today. Your year might have been easier than mine, but I doubt it.
We'll see. I mean, I think 2025 just, across the world has just been such a weird time. And, the best thing we could do is come together and laugh about it, cry about it, and enjoy the fact that we love cannabis.
Yeah, maybe have a little doobie while we do laugh and cry about it.
Yeah.
I actually want to kick off with one of the big wins from last year because it was a huge achievement in the state of Victoria to have a modification of the rules around driving and cannabis for Victorian patients. We know it's not everything we want it to be. We know it's not the full extent of what the law can be, nor is it available in other states. But it was a huge, meaningful change as of March 1st. It changed my life legitimately. How meaningful was that for you?
I think it was incredibly meaningful because at least it allows now that discretion and that acknowledgement that medicinal cannabis patients are being treated differently at a roadside drug test. And, if you take any other form of medication, you're not drug tested for it. So I think the change was incredibly meaningful. We heard from magistrates themselves that have to use this reform to their advantage, that it was welcome and that they are using that. And we've seen several cases now go through courts where discretion has been used and patients have not lost their license.
Yeah, as far as I've heard, that anyone that's represented themselves appropriately has been able to use that defense, present at court, explain that they're a medicinal cannabis patient and they're off the hook. And I think that's huge. Like, do we have any numbers or figures yet? I mean, it's been less than a year, but do we have any understanding about how that change has impacted how many people are losing their license?
Unfortunately, the structure around how courts capture data isn't data collection isn't at the forefront there. So it's more anecdotal that we're hearing these stories. But I think it would be worthwhile for us to review that after that 12-month period come March this year, how effective that legislation has been, but also, receiving some of that feedback from magistrates about their experience, because for them, that was the most frustrating thing, was that it was black and white. If you are appearing before court with THC in your system, it doesn't matter if you're a patient or not, it is an instant loss of license. So for a magistrate to be able to say, I can see that you're a medicinal cannabis patient, I can see that you've got a current script, the police have not indicated that you are impaired, then I will use that discretion to then allow you to keep your license.
I'm curious to know, Jeremy Buckingham's fighting for the same kind of thing in New South Wales. Chris Minns doesn't seem to, show a desire for a lot of progress in the state. What's the vibe check on what Jeremy's up to in New South Wales?
Jeremy is working tirelessly on this, and this is the benefits of having MPs in different states where you are dealing with the same sort of communities, the same sort of issues. And for one state to be able to go first, it does start to set that precedence about this is effective. And again, it's not the ultimate solution, but it is a step towards broader reform. And it does mean that patients aren't suffering that discrimination. I would anticipate that in New South Wales they will move forward, but it's so political, and this is the problem. It's not necessarily about patients, it's not about human rights, it's not about compassion, but it's about politics at the end of the day, and that's just not fair. You can't have an option where someone has finally found relief through using a medicinal product and then say to them, you're not doing anything illegal, but, using your medication isn't illegal, but technically driving with it is. When most of those patients have probably been opiate users at one point in their life and thought, hang on, this is far more impairing than anything I'm using now. And I think that Jeremy has done all the right things to tick those boxes. He has worked constructively with government. He has been part of the drug summit. He has hosted a parliamentary inquiry into this, and all signs are pointing towards reform. And thankfully, because we've had quite a successful experience here in Victoria, I would hope that New South Wales would follow suit. And I don't know if you just saw recently in the UK where just this month, January 2026, the UK police have been instructed to adopt a patient first, being a suspect second approach when dealing with medicinal cannabis patients. And that's essentially what we're saying is, if you're not ready to change the laws that you're allowing police that discretion on a roadside, and we think that police should be able to use their discretion, they're the ones who can see you and pulling you over. But if you're not willing to use that discretion, at least allow a magistrate to have that discretion, because again, they're the experts when it comes to seeing these processes come through their court system.
What always just comes to mind whenever I think about the police enforcing the broad array of poor drug laws we've got in this state, whether it's, roadside tests or simple possession, I always think about the fact that, my time in Vancouver, the Vancouver Police Department members could consume cannabis in the same way they could consume alcohol. Like, part of their code of conduct, it was written in about basically just consume it the same way that someone would respectfully consume booze. And to think that, on one side of the world, a place that we often get compared to as, a sister country or having similar values, that their police are at a point where they're like, not only do we not really care about this as a problem anymore, we actually see the benefit for our police force. And, we're not even asking for that in Victoria or Australia. We're not asking for pro-cannabis police officers, but we're just asking for the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah. And interestingly, in Canada, if you're pulled over, you're put through sort of that sobriety test first and foremost. They don't test you if drugs are in your system first. They test if you can walk the line, if you can touch your nose and bend over at the same time, and all those sorts of indicators that indicate that you may be impaired. If you fail that test, then they'll do a swab to see if there's drugs in your system. Here, our system is fundamentally flawed by way of only testing for presence and not testing for impairment. And what we've found in our, looking at this more broadly, is that those police officers that are manning those RDT units aren't necessarily trained in testing impairment either. So if someone tests positive to one of those drugs, well, they can kind of indicate what that might be. But if someone is clearly impaired but tests negative to any drug test you're giving them, then what does the police officer do? They're meant to charge them with impaired driving because it's unsafe for them to be on the road. Now, it all beggars belief why this doesn't add up. And again, it's medicinal cannabis patients who get discriminated in this instance.
Well, I saw David and likely you as well release some stats about, I think it's 43% of arrests in Victoria or drug arrests are related to cannabis. And all we're just asking for is a redirection of resources into things that actually desperately need it, because sensible people know, sensible societies know that, cannabis is not this big, colossal, overbearing problem on society. Like any substance, like anything that, can affect the mind. It does need to have some regulation to it, but it is quite
Yeah.
a shame that, there's still these boogeyman stories. As I've watched cricket all summer, and it's just been stacked with gambling ads. And I
Yeah.
literally know people whose lives have been ruined by gambling, whereas I don't know
Hmm.
anyone whose life has been ruined by cannabis. And I know a hell of a lot more cannabis users.
Yeah. Yeah. And even just looking at where the police set up roadside drug testing, we had media reports just recently, and it's always working class areas, that areas like Pakenham and Dandenong and Frankston in my electorate are overwhelmingly where they're pinging people for drug driving. It's like, well, I don't see you set up in Toorak or South Yarra, where there's just as many people who would probably be using drugs and driving, yet that's the focal point, working class areas.
Where were they when Tim Smith was on the road? That's what I'm wondering.
Uh-huh. Right. I mean, imagine if we had drug testing in Parliament. We'd have a real interesting time.
There'd be high vacancy rates, that's for sure. Well, we've started to get down the track of, a bit of governmental criticism, and it really leans nicely into the next thing I want to speak about, because, you have worked really, really hard on this, David, as well. This is a thing that's bigger. Fiona Patton before you, working on this proposal for a legalisation model in Victoria, and time again, the evidence comes through, the costs comes through, the inquiry findings come through and say, hey, this is a really good idea. Why have the government opted out of legalising cannabis again, or having any sensible conversation about regulation?
Well, that's the most disappointing part of it, is that the evidence is overwhelmingly positive, particularly towards decriminalisation. And, you've sort of indicated there that the work we've done this year was February of last year, almost 12 months ago now. We went along to Canberra. We looked at their statutory review. It had been 5 years. It had been leading into 6 years now since they have decriminalised. And the evidence there was overwhelming that hospital admissions had an increase, that we didn't see a heightened increase in ambulance call-outs. We didn't see an increase in roadside accidents or fatalities. What we did see is a massive decrease in people being arrested. And those that might need access to help are more likely to access help because the stigma is reduced, as well as the fact that they're not criminalised. But what's an issue here for me is that the Victorian Government especially continues to emphasise that they support a health-led approach when it comes to cannabis reform, and they're all for harm reduction, yet it's the criminalisation of cannabis that causes the most harm. So I guess for me, the question beggars belief again as to what's going on here. And, although the Labor Party do have an internal policy around cannabis reform, when it comes to their cabinet, you do have different perspectives. You have a conservative side within the Labor Party that may not be ready to take that next step. And, the political will. Is the political will there, particularly in 2026 in an election year? Again, that's sort of where we're at with them.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit like that's not about genuine policy concern. It's a little bit about political risk management. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I mean, when we have done all the work that we've done over the last 3 years, we've worked constructively with the government. We have brought them on the journey. I've even had members of the Labor Party that have been part of that inquiry process say to me, I was very sceptical, but I'm definitely coming around to the idea that the status quo is not something we want to maintain. We need to move forward with regulation, and we can all differ as to what that might look like. But even some of the most conservative of the Liberal Party members are definitely changing their rhetoric around this as well.
I always think about when you mentioned to me when you entered Parliament, and the way, some people would sidle up to you and let you know about their little progressive causes that they're also into. Certainly don't have to name names, but are you hearing parliamentarians and people like, in the fold kind of confessing to their own use? And, we heard a bit of that recreational use rhetoric last year, just Inter Allen admitted to it and so forth. No harm done. But, is anyone saying to you, oh yeah, I've got a doctor, or I've got medical cannabis, or I'm using gummies to sleep?
Definitely, yes. Most certainly, a lot of MPs are telling me that they now use gummies to sleep.
I bet.
That would be the most prevalent disclosure I receive. I also get a lot of MPs whose like family members or children even are experiencing reactions to different medications or may have a diagnosis or maybe going through cancer treatment, and they always come and ask questions as well. And we've even seen some members of parliament stand up in parliament talking on different topics like voluntary assisted dying, for example, raise the fact that during end of life or their dear and loved ones, they found that medicinal cannabis was the most helpful during that period of time, and accepting the fact that, you know, we were the ones helping them along with that conversation.
If you had 10 minutes off the record with Jacinta Allen, you know, it's your ultimate pitch. Like, I don't think she's an unreasonable person, and I know you've had reasonable conversations around this, and we were excited about her admitting to having had a puff and inhaled once upon a time. But like, if you could just level with her, or like, you know, ask her anything, tell her anything, what do you think would your pitch would center around?
I've only ever had the opportunity to meet with the Premier formally once, but interestingly, I went along to Bendigo Pride, not that long ago, and it's in her backyard. That's her local area. So she was there.
Represent. Yes, she and I went to the same school.
Funnily enough, I was standing there talking to these two coppers, and one of them is originally from the Netherlands, and he jokingly said to me, "Can I get a concession because, you know, I'm Dutch and we consume cannabis?" And the Premier walked over at that time, which was hilarious. And I said to her, "Premier, you know, you should meet this particular police officer. He has an interesting position." And we actually had a really robust conversation. And she said to me, "Oh, so it's a law and order issue, is it, Rachel?" I said, "Yes, Premier. You know, police resourcing can be better utilised elsewhere." And, you know, I thought that she was sort of on the same page with me on that. And it was a funny interaction because this police officer was essentially saying he wanted some sort of cultural dispensation sort of thing.
I think he's earned it.
But, you know, what I would say to her is remind her of that conversation and let her know that this is sensible reform and it enjoys wide community support. 80% of Australians think that cannabis should no longer be a criminal offence. Everyone agrees that police resourcing is scarce and police are stretched to their limits in dealing with so many other violent crimes. Cannabis is a non-violent crime. It is, if anything, it hurts our most vulnerable implementing it as a criminal offence. So what I would push forward with her is to really reiterate that this is sensible. It's a no-brainer. The community would be on your side with this. It's not going to be a clash of, well, we're appearing to be soft on drug offences. And the evidence shows, like when when the Premier came forward with acknowledging that we need drug checking services, we need pill testing. Look, we've had a summer when we've seen no one die at a music festival. How great is that? And she should be really proud of the fact that she stood up and made that reform happen with a push from us crossbenchers, of course. But this gives her that opportunity to do that again. And that's what I would say to her.
There's quite a lot, you know, like when I speak to friends of mine, and, you know, I don't want to criticize, but people have pretty strong political opinions without, you know, truly understanding the nature of how it all works. You know, many people to me would say, there's a really poor or weak opposition in Victoria. You know, why does our government lack so much boldness? Conversely, you know, I know that within the Liberal Party, there are some pro-cannabis people, and even within their recent conference, they discussed the position on cannabis. So does the change in Liberal leadership here in Victoria mean anything for cannabis at all? Like, I'm going to be straight up. I'm not trying to advocate for people to vote for Conservative parties, but, you know, sometimes, you know, broken clock can be correct twice a day or whatever the saying is. So,
yep.
Yeah, what does this Liberal Party position mean for Victorians?
And hey, you make a great point that at the Liberal Party state conference, someone did put up a cannabis reform policy, and I thought it was quite an interesting position. It was very much centred on small business, which is what the Liberals do. That's their bread and butter, small businesses. It was very much centred on an Australian market and small enterprise rather than multinationals coming in. And it was differing to how Labor have sort of positioned themselves, which would be more around like a Canadian style model of they'll be your drug dealer essentially. They're the wholesaler regulator, all of that.
Yeah, they get their dollar per gram.
Yeah. Whereas Jess Wilson is the new Liberal leader, she is a little L Liberal. She is quite progressive amongst the mix of Liberal parties, Liberal Party members, but she also comes from a business council background. She would be looking at those opportunities for small business as well as bringing money back into the bottom line of the budget. And I think that Jess is a reasonable person. I've worked with her collaboratively. We've been on quite a few speaking panels together and such. So we've maintained a good working relationship. And, you know, she's not one, I think, to shy away from those tough conversations around the fact that this is a market that is owned and dominated by organised crime. And if you are wanting to really talk about the fire bombings, the tobacco war, the elements of organised crime within Victoria, the first thing you need to do is look at how do we get the money out of the coffers of organised crime, and cannabis would be one of those easy steps to take.
Victoria's tobacco wars are such an incredible real-time case study in the ineffectiveness, and not just ineffectiveness, but the steps backwards we can take as a society when prohibition is enacted. Like, it is absolutely wild to see. Like I said, in real time, you know, it's a case study in what not to do, and we've got it right in front of our eyes. You know, like, I am not pro smoking, I'm not pro tobacco, but my God, we need better rules and regulations around that and better access for that. And it's, you know, it leaks into cannabis. It's like, why do we continue to allow these gangs that, you know, I know use cannabis money for other nefarious things, and that's the problem. That's the real gateway there. It's like, you know, cannabis money lets them do other drugs. So it's really confronting to see those tobacco wars as a real-time example.
And another, you know, argument that I always say, particularly when people say, "Oh, you've got to keep young people away from drugs, particularly cannabis," it's like, well, maintaining the status quo doesn't help in that respect, because if you are going to go see old mate down the road, he's likely to offer you quite a mirage of different drugs. It's in their best interest for a drug dealer to offer you different types of drugs. They don't just sell cannabis, they might sell other things as well. So if you are wanting to sort of move away from that interaction with criminals, particularly for young people, well, again, regulate it, tax it, educate. Like, it's so simple.
That's a really nice segue into what I want to speak about with you next, because I constantly speak to cannabis patients who are struggling to get meaningful and, you know, legal access to cannabis. I would have said, you know, we don't want the Wild West that it has been a couple of years ago with vertically integrated clinics just, you know, ticking someone off via text message and saying, yep, have 60 grams of flour a month. But I constantly speak to friends of mine who are trying to go the legal path, who are getting the GP letters and are being turned away, which is really challenging, because I know for a long time a lot of pharmacists and doctors would have said harm reduction is important. And if purely, you know, you're stopping going to a drug dealer down the road, that's a win for health right there. But, you know, a lot of companies are scared. A lot of clinics are scared. A lot of companies and clinics have been doing the wrong thing for some time. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the TGA consultation just in general, knowing that, like, you know, the legalization of cannabis is such a broad responsibility, and I don't expect you to be the master of the TGA consult, because there are a lot of industry bodies and companies taking care of that. But watching that consultation as a Legalise Cannabis MP, kind of what stood out to you? What were your observations?
Firstly, I think the media circling around this particular topic has been absolutely appalling. And they have focused on certain voices rather than actually listening to the industry as a whole. And this is actually a really natural step, I think. It's been 10 years since we have legalised medicinal cannabis, and it is the right time to review if the current access scheme is fit for purpose. There's no denying that. So I think this has been a real opportunity to improve the system. Do I think that will be the end result? I'm still on the fence about it. And it seems as though the consultation has been extended, and then there's another round of consultation. And I think I recently just saw announced that they are now bringing industry bodies into the conversation. I mean, that should have been the first port of call, to sit down as the TGA with those that are representing industry, so their industry bodies, and have those robust conversations about what is working, what isn't, But the issue for me, and what you've just identified earlier, is the patient experience needs to be front and center. And I'm not sure that the TGA have really thought through that that was going to be such a pivotal part of this consultation, and that patients would be really robust in advocating for their own healthcare needs in this space as well.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting experience. I'd say one of my key criticisms is it hasn't been patient centric at all. And if it were a true consultation, it would have been less reactive, because I do feel like it's come from this place of pressure from, the AMA, the Pharmacy Guild in Queensland, just basically saying a flat out no, cannabis has no therapeutic value, therefore they want flower gone immediately as the first step, and then all these other different levels of change that they're requiring that would make access really difficult. And while I understand, there are many sides, every story, those organizations won't even talk to the industry. They won't talk to anyone that has reached out, whether it's a governing body, an advocate, or a company. And that's where I see how disingenuous this process is going to be. If you've got people that are wanting to enter the debate and present their opinion, but refuse to, or they're not even entering the debate, they're imposing their opinion and refusing the debate. That's what upsets me the most, is there's these voices guiding this consultation, this process, that, aren't really here for honorable reasons.
And I guess, medicinal cannabis has never been easy to it's like putting a square peg into a round hole when it comes to that sort of regulatory model that the TGA are used to dealing with around, pharmaceutical drugs, for example. And I do sympathise with the medical professionals in that space, because they have had to relearn a lot of the things that they have learned. But front and center, their role and responsibility has to be to their patients. And I mean, even I was looking back at some of the interviews I did when I was first elected, and some of the conversations that were happening around medicinal cannabis then. And I note that the president of the Royal Australian College of GPs said medicinal cannabis has become a business model versus a healthcare solution, and highlighted the fact that big business was getting involved in Medcan. Now, that was in 2022, 23 that those comments were made. So we saw this coming. There's no denying that there was going to be pushback, and the industry is, so valuable in Australia that there has to be some sort of oversight, no doubt. But the reactionary misinformation about medicinal cannabis that has been prevalent in the media around mental health, about people's use or misuse, about misprescribing and things like that. There's no doubt that these things are happening, but they're happening with all drugs. They're happening with in all professions. And to single out medicinal cannabis, I think, is very unfair. But in saying that, we should welcome better, more robust reforms in this space. But it needs to be consulted with industry, and it needs to be patient focused.
I think you absolutely nailed it there. This is actually, in earnest, a really great idea, but whether it will actually benefit patients and improve access or, streamline it, remains to be seen. So we'll have to kind of watch this space.
Definitely.
Do you think that consultation kind of said anything about the way cannabis is perceived in Australia in general anyway? Like, for me, not to put words in your mouth, I think it kind of shows the prevalence of the conservatism that still kind of eats at our core. Australians have a great reputation for being easygoing and laid back internationally. I think that's bullshit. We're not. Deep down, we're still going, why is that guy doing that? And why is his Ford Raptor better than mine? So, again, apologies, don't want to put words in your mouth, but did that experience kind of say anything to the challenges you face trying to decriminalise, legalise, etc.?
Oh, most certainly. Like, we are a heavily regulated community, like we are a heavily regulated country more broadly. And even just the experience of people traveling overseas and seeing where cannabis has either been legalized or decriminalized, 9 times out of 10, people who are opposing cannabis always say to me, I can smell it everywhere. And it's, people are so public about it. And the best way I reassure them is to remind them that we're in Australia and we're so heavily regulated that you wouldn't be allowed to just light up a joint in the middle of a shopping mall. It's just not going to be a thing.
We almost must do that. Like, we must ensure that we have some kind of reasonable rules around that. I agree.
Yeah. But I agree that it does show that, I feel like we do take several steps forward and then we're hauled back because we just can't quite get it right. And I think reactionary media is also to play in that respect. And the hardest thing about cannabis reform for me has been breaking down that stigma. And the media presence on cannabis is overwhelmingly focused on that negative side of things, whether it be around mental health or misuse or even the fact that it's become a multi-million-dollar industry in Australia and how that is playing out, or the fact that there's a backdoor way to access cannabis. All of those arguments really are not counteracted by the patient experience or the fact that overwhelmingly those that are arrested for cannabis, if they're socially using, are our most vulnerable and our young people, or the fact that you or I can't just be so, well, we are so public about our cannabis use to break down some of that stigma, but so many people I speak to just can't be honest with those that are around them that they use cannabis because there is always that stigma surrounding. So I think what this process has highlighted to me is that we have a long way to go. We are a heavily regulated country and we are going to have to work within those parameters. But we also have to remember that cannabis has been life-changing for so many people and it's not going to go away. It never has. If anything, now that we know more about how it interacts with our bodies, we are getting more experimental with that, which is not a bad thing.
Let's talk about a couple of things that are, cannabis adjacent. I'd love to hear about hemp reform. So can you walk us through the hemp industry bill? What does it change and why was it needed?
Yeah, so excited that there is movement on hemp. So I introduced a private members bill, 2022-23, I believe, which meant that, the government doesn't support private members bills, but they were quite keen on seeing what we were going to do next with that. And we took it to an inquiry process. And overwhelmingly what that inquiry showed was that hemp being treated as part of the Drugs, Poisons and Controlled Substances Act meant that the crops just never flourished in so many words. So the opportunity for hemp to become a flourishing industry in Victoria has always been stifled by the fact that it is classified under Drugs, Poisons and Controlled Substances Act. And it meant that hemp in itself needed its own standalone legislation so that it can be treated as a crop, so it can be treated as something that people, particularly farmers, don't feel like they have to jump through a thousand hoops just to get a license to grow. And it also showed that there was a lot of opportunity there to look at ways that we encourage greater development in this space. So whether it's be through procurement of some of the new government builds, hemp as a building material is becoming more and more popular. There's opportunity there. Whether it be that, and this is what I included in my legislation, and I'm hopeful the government will follow through with this, is looking at allowing for a scientific license so that you can start cultivating your own strains and you have that protection that if it does slightly go above that 1% THC, you're not going to be penalised for that. So a scientific license would mean that you can test different strains and that it would protect you for 3% THC or below. But the process essentially was that the government decided, yes, we're gonna do something with hemp. We're gonna have movement, and they opened up a consultation process at the end of last year with industry, with those that are keen on seeing hemp become a robust industry here in Victoria. And ultimately that's resulted in the government sort of introducing their own legislation sometime this year, I'm hopeful of. I suspect it might look very similar to the bill I introduced with a few changes maybe, but I'm hopeful that it will be fairly straightforward and we will see some movement in that space.
That's the old Fiona Patton special, isn't it? Get Fiona to do the work and then relabel her bill.
She taught us all well, that's for sure. Yes. Yeah.
How about workplace drug testing? What did you learn from the drug testing inquiry and about how outdated our system is?
Oh, gosh. The workplace drug testing inquiry really opened my eyes to workplace safety. And workplace drug testing does not equal workplace safety was the bottom line of what I learned throughout that inquiry process, because workers are less inclined to report an incident out of fear of being drug tested. So it doesn't make anyone safe because no one actually reports any incidents, and incidents can actually keep happening. A lot of the workers' representatives or union reps that also indicated that a lot of workers use harder drugs over the weekend because they know it's out of their system on Monday compared to having a joint on a Friday night,
100%.
So they're much more likely to be impaired at work on a Monday after a bender than they would be if they had a joint on a Friday night. But that's not what workplace drug testing is about. It's about testing for presence, not impairment. And I found it really fascinating that the workplace drug testing guidelines or workplace guidelines that most employers are expected to utilise through WorkSafe, those guidelines are pre-legalisation of medicinal cannabis. So there's not even mention of that. The guidelines are completely outdated and they continue to discriminate patients. So that outdated system has resulted in this sort of really, I guess, archaic way of going, we're going to test for presence. These are the things we're testing for. And there's no ifs or buts about whether you have a medication or a prescription or not. And yeah, it was an interesting inquiry. And I think as a committee of members of parliament from all different sides of politics, we all came together to agree that there's so much that needed to be done as reform, that these laws were so outdated, and workers, we heard from so many workers who had lost their jobs. Yeah.
Are you optimistic that changes will come?
I am. I think that anything around WorkSafe and workplace guidelines is such a big beast to wield that, I think industry might have pushback, but when it comes to the unions and those representing the workers, there's no doubt that they need to be front and centre in that conversation. And we have actually seen some industries actually step up and start doing their own better mechanisms and ways of testing. Like there was a mining industry representatives came along and they actually have sort of eye scanning technology that they use with their workers. Now, that's private companies using that sort of technology to actually verify that their workers aren't impaired. And that might be, they might have been out drinking all night through to taking drugs through to not sleeping.
Is that something that kind of like tracks their like eye movements, like, the heaviness of their eyelids and things like that? 'Cause it sounds amazing, but also incredibly dystopian.
It does. But yeah, wow, out on the fields of Gina Rinehart's fortunes, you never know what you're going to find, I suppose.
Well, hey, she's heavily invested in cannabis, so it kind of makes sense.
Yes.
Cautiously optimistic with workplace drug testing. Excellent. Well, Rachel, I've got a brand new segment in the show. I've only done this once before, and this segment is called From a Friend. And in this segment, what I like to do is ask my guest a question that has been supplied by someone that they know. Now, you are such a popular lady that I've actually got two friends here to ask questions for you. The first one coming from your partner, Renee.
Oh, dear.
So, Renee, I was about to say it's PG. I mean, the wording is PG. I don't know if the content is. So let's see how we go. Rachel, how do you think cannabis can positively impact romantic relationships?
Oh, that is so sweet. Well, I know it positively impacts my romantic relationship, that's for sure. That's how I knew that my girlfriend was going to be my girlfriend. She's got a big weed leaf tattooed on her bum cheek, so it was a definite for me. I think that we've seen time and time again that cannabis really helps with anxiety, really helps as a mood elevator, as a relaxant, as a stimulant, all the things that are conducive towards having an excellent and love life and a passionate romance. That's for sure.
That's lovely. I'll never forget when I was a bud tender and the old bloke that came in asking, can I get something that'll make me a bit and I'm like, sorry, what? And this is an audio show. He did it again. He goes, just something that can be a bit, and he thrusts. He goes, and I'm like, okay, mate, I can give you something that'll set the mood. I don't think I have Viagra in cannabis form, so apologies for that.
Look, who knows what we'll discover as we learn more about the different terpenes, that's for sure.
Thank you, the wonderful Renee, best celebrant in the city, that's for sure.
Yes.
Next one comes from your fellow crossbencher, Georgie Purcell, and I actually have two questions from Georgie. So Georgie, just like you, is an incredibly busy person, and so I was really grateful that she had the time to give me these. So two questions. The first one is, why more than ever in 2026 is it vital to protect the crossbench in Parliament?
Oh, great question. Georgie and I have operated really constructively and worked together as crossbenchers on a myriad of different things. And I think it's really important that we, you know, hold our heads high as crossbenchers, because we are there. We're never going to be in government. We are there to champion the issues for what we're elected to do. And often we are from minor parties. But there has been a lot of talk about voting reform and changing the system so that those that are in those positions of power and are in government actually have a benefit of that, and us crossbenchers will probably lose opportunity to be elected. So I think that's what she's pointing to, is that as crossbenchers, we, over 30% of the population don't vote for a major party anymore. And we deserve to be there. And it's really important that we, stake our claim and show that, we're there to question the government. We're there to make sure that policy positions going forward are robust, and we're there to hold them to account. And it's such an important position to be in, but it's also such an important piece of democracy, that there is that ability to work from all sides of politics, come together and find common ground that is in the best interests of our communities.
It is an election year for you. So, what are the implications of these potential changes, or even the discussions about change? What does that mean for your re-election campaign and even your desires for this upcoming year?
I think it's out of my control if they reform voting laws. I will be quite vocal on the positioning of it. I think that political distrust is at an all-time high. We have a system that, albeit is faulted, needs reform, but to only do half of that reform and that would only benefit a select few, rather than actually looking at how we vote more broadly, I think is a massive failing in that part. I would also say that you've got to meet the voter where they're at. And if the current voting system is actually meaning that overwhelming majority of people are turning up and are voting and are engaging, then we need to maintain that engagement, not create another system that is going to be complex and confusing for people. Because again, why would people trust politicians that are just going to keep changing the laws ultimately to give them more power? I'm not that worried if it does change. It will be harder for me to get re-elected, that's for sure. But in saying that, all I can do is do the best I have done. I have several hats in this job, whether it be a Legalise Cannabis MP or a member for the South East. And I know that I've worked constructively in both of those communities, and I've got a lot more to do. So unfortunately, some things do take time. Most things in politics take a long time. And to have that opportunity to continue the good work that we have done as Legalise Cannabis is important to me, and I'm passionate about that.
Well, that nicely leads into Georgie's second question, and that is, how will you continue to collaborate with progressive crossbenchers in 2026?
We always find common ground. There's things that we find that we're all talking about. So pill testing was a great example of that. It was us Legalise Cannabis MPs, Georgie from Animal Justice and Ave from the Greens collaborated in that space to make sure that we put forward a joint bill, funnily enough, to push for reform on that and show that some things are above political parties, some things are above politics. This was about saving our communities and making sure that people are safe, particularly when taking drugs. And, overwhelmingly, let's have a look at the outcome of that. We've had a really good summer festival season where and pill testing has meant that we are seeing alerts going out. The drug checking service that is currently operating reported in at least 3 to 4 incidents of finding nitazines in what someone brought in thinking it was MDMA or cocaine. Now, nitazines are something you never want to mess with. So that's already changing lives. It's saving lives. And I think that for us to continue those sorts of collaborations, it's just about finding, something we're all really passionate about. Georgie and I have also worked on an abortion report together, coming at it from different perspectives. She represents regional Victoria. I'm more in a metro seat, but having similar experiences where we do find that those that we represent are reporting in similar issues, and that level of collaboration maintains a strong working presence as a crossbench, but it also puts that extra pressure on government to respond and to react. And, we're squeaky wheels on the crossbench, that's for sure.
It's funny because I think at a time where I'm more globally disengaged in politics and kind of frustrated or kind of at my wit's end, between the work that you, Georgie, and Ave do, it's actually gotten me a lot more engaged locally and, what I care about in things that I can actually control. So the three of you have been a really distinct breath of fresh air over the last couple of years. And I know you can't achieve everything that you want to, and the wheels of change are slow, but I really do believe that the three of you are going to, whenever the time is up, will have left a positive impact as you continue to do. So I'm just grateful for that. And I am someone who has moved away from major parties to minor parties. My votes still end up with Labor, as tends to be the case.
Begrudgingly, yeah.
It's important that that the message is sent that these other parties can teach you different things, and even if you don't agree with the whole platform, I'm sure there's people who think that you guys are a single policy party. It's not the case. I'm sure people get annoyed that Georgie cares too much about pigeons, and it's just like no, like it's all a part of this rich tapestry that we're expected to engage in. And Georgie has taught me so much, and you have, and Ave have. So just want to say a little thank you there, and of course a big shout out to Georgie for contributing those questions.
Yeah, thanks, GP.
So I want to talk beyond cannabis and just a quick little reflection on what 2025 looked like outside of cannabis. So what's one non-cannabis achievement from 2025 that you're really proud of?
Oh, it would have to be seeing the government announce that they were going to move on vicarious liability legislation. So vicarious liability is essentially where we saw a high court ruling. We saw a Catholic Church diocese challenge a survivor to say that, well, technically we're not accountable to you because our priest wasn't an employee. So they're not vicariously liable then for any abuse that happened within their institution. So I put forward a private member's bill to see vicarious liability laws enacted. And the government didn't respond with an announcement at that time, but there was definitely movement happening in the background. And then finally they said we would introduce legislation by the end of the year. And what that means is that, survivors can actually have their opportunity for litigation. They can have their day in court. It also means that we should see a massive culture shift within some of these organisations. And I'm not just talking about the church here, but I'm talking about sporting clubs and coaches. I'm talking about organisations like Scouts or Lifesavers where you've got volunteers. We all need to make sure that those that are in those positions of power, authority, or control over children do not misuse that ability to inflict sexual violence on children. So pushing forward with that, I think, is for me such a it's been pivotal. And because I've been working with so many survivors, most of whom have expressed, real disappointment in how long this process has taken. It's been over 12 months since that High Court ruling. And what it meant was that the church in particular was then trying to push litigation out of court and trying to get survivors to settle. And, it's those sorts of tactics that we don't want to see. There should be that change in culture. There should be that acknowledgement that we should be standing up for survivors. But interestingly, what I found in that conversation is this sort of ongoing conversation with survivors of like, why are you as a cannabis MP standing up for us survivors? And I just reiterate to them, because many of our people are survivors as well. And that's what we do. We stand up for people, especially vulnerable people and those who need their voices elevated. This is about compassion. And that is one of our core principles. And we're more than happy to have those conversations that everyone else isn't willing to have, because it's important that we do.
On a similar note, why was it important to introduce mandatory child abuse prevention education into working with children checks?
And again, this was something that Georgie Purcell and I actually worked on together. It's that we really need to understand what is the experience of survivors, and survivors were calling for this. It has been widely acknowledged that we need a nationally harmonised working with children scheme. And these calls were well and truly before there was any sort of allegations made about the horrific incidents that we've seen across Victoria of abuse within childcare. But the training for those who are actually applying for working with children check is really important for people to understand child sexual abuse, including those tactics of perpetrators. And how to promote the rights of children and their voices, but also some of those indicators of abuse, even how to talk to children about their concerns and how to respond to how to respond to disclosures if a child does make a disclosure. The reality is that 30% of people aged over 16 in Australia have endured child sexual abuse. That figure is appalling. And I'm someone who, well, used to have a responsible service of alcohol certificate. And this was one of the things that survivor Emma Harkinson pointed out to me, was that she too was working in a bar and had a RSA. And that was a full day of training about how to understand, if someone's drunk, how to deal with them. A working with children check, on the other hand, where you've got great responsibility over children, a tick and flick box and a police check. And, perpetrators were just scraping through easily. And this is the issue, is that it's not just about empowering children to be able to come forward. It's about empowering adults to be able to identify those issues. It's about identifying some of those tactics of perpetrators, but also some of those warning signs within children, and hearing from survivors of their experience of, their parents and those around them, their teachers, for example, acknowledging that, they started to go quiet, they started to misbehave, they started to do this, do that. Well, those are some of those telltale signs of abuse, and we're missing them. So we really need to make sure that those that are our greatest protections of children have those skills to be able to protect them.
Such a good point. And you struck a nerve there, just because as a former teacher myself, doing the mandatory reporting training modules every year, such important information was imparted on those, but I remember it having a bit of that tick and flick feeling as well, where it's like, this is a 3-hour module. We've given you a 45-minute staff meeting to do it. And I think it just emphasizes the importance of getting these messages out, because firsthand, one of the things I've seen over the last few years is it's been really great for adults and children to get an understanding of what grooming is. Once upon a time, that was just kind of seen as banter, but now, we're getting a really clear understanding of what abuse can be beyond physical touch. So I'm really pleased to hear that there's constant reforms and things that will help our kids. The other thing I want to talk about in 2025 is the treaty and the First Peoples Assembly. How do you see the role of that shaping future legislation, including even drug policy?
I think it was fundamentally important for us to see that legislation come into fruition last year. And it is such important reform because disproportionately our First Peoples are overrepresented in so many settings, whether that be in poor health outcomes, whether that be in poor education outcomes, whether that be in representations in our custodial settings. And the system as we currently know it isn't working. We need to make sure that First Nations people have a seat at the table and have a voice in deciding predominantly laws that are going to impact their communities, and trying to alleviate some of those misconceptions, some of that truth-telling that came out of Yuruk as well, and acknowledging that we still have a long way to come. And I think that the First Peoples Assembly have been amazing to work with, and it has been such a learning experience for me as well, particularly around Aboriginal people's right to self-determination and the ability to knowledge share as well. And I mean, I have learnt so much from spending time with an elder in my community, Boonwurrung elder, Uncle Mark, and I have learnt so much more about the seasons. I have learnt so much more about our environments. I've learnt so much more about the care and responsibility we all have to not only our environment, but to our people as well. And people I use more broadly in the term of our communities. We have so much to learn in that space, and to have Aboriginal voices front and centre and meaningfully engaging in those conversations is so important, because we can't keep going the way we're going.
Couldn't agree more. Rachel, looking ahead to 2026, we're already a few weeks into it, but what are your top priorities for this year?
I want to reiterate that for me, the top priority is that we stop arresting our people, is a mantra that I write down time and time again. And I've been spending a bit of time journaling over the last couple of weeks, just preparing for my 2026. And that is one of the two major reforms that I want to see this year. So stop arresting our people would be a push towards cannabis law reform. The government rejected decriminalisation, but I will try other mechanisms to see that we are not going to continue to arrest a minimum of, about 4,000 Victorians a year. We also saw last year police powers uplifted by way of their ability to be able to create designated search areas or designated areas where they can stop and search. My fear with that, and what we're already seeing in the data, is that a police officer might look at someone and go, well, I'm going to stop and search you because I think you have a weapon. If you don't have a weapon on you, but you have some cannabis on you, they are likely to arrest you for that. They have to, essentially. So my concern is with more policing, with more stop and search powers, with more designated areas, we will see an increase in arrests of people just for possessing cannabis. And those arrests will predominantly be our First Nations people. It will be young people, especially from culturally diverse backgrounds. It will be people from working class communities. They don't stop and search and arrest people in Toorak, that's for sure. I mean, Toorak and me don't get along, clearly. I keep using those.
Frankston represent.
But that will be, we're gonna have a short parliamentary year because, and this is all new to me really, because as someone who is now an incumbent trying to get re-elected, but Parliament does go into a caretaker mode. So we only have a few opportunities to try and really push our agenda. But yes, I would be pushing for the reduction in stop arresting our people and change the laws, but also reducing the stigma and how I can continue to put myself out there, talk about my experiences, share the experience of those that anecdotally tell me their experiences as well, and to really shift the conversation around cannabis. We know that the overwhelming majority of people support what we're trying to achieve, but does the government know? I'm not convinced, so I'm going to make sure that they do.
Well, Rachel, as a veteran of the show, you'll be well aware that our final segment is called Pools of Wisdom. And though we love the long conversation, we try to leave our listeners with a key takeaway, dinner party fact, or some kind of little hot toke. Mm-hmm. So, Rachel, what is your pool of wisdom?
Mine, there are two for me. One would be don't believe everything you hear. So misinformation is rife. Trust your gut and your instincts. The other would be life is really hard in the world right now, and just to be kind to one another, particularly in this space around cannabis reform. We all need to work together and support one another and uplift one another.
Hell yeah. Well, on your first point there, I sent my first AI video that I didn't realize was AI the other day. And so I caught myself feeling very tech illiterate. I sent through a funny video to a mate and he's like, yeah, that's AI. I'm like, I'm usually the that's AI guy.
Are you sure cats can't surf?
Oh, well, I mean, I live for cat videos. You and I are, kindred spirits in the cat department. And if the internet takes genuine animal videos from me, I don't know what I'll do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, Rachel, as always, thank you so much for the work that you do for your electorate, for the state of Victoria, for cannabis reform. It is a real honour for me to call you a friend and a real privilege to have you on this show, taking time out of your hard work and your hard fights to speak to this audience, because I know they're also grateful for the work you do. So thank you for everything.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to you, Paul, for being not only a good mate, but also for being such a champion of the cause. Love your work.